It wasn't just a dog, it wasn't just a horror movie. Cujo was a descent into heat-soaked madness, where the barking outside wasn't just noise, it was a countdown to breakdown. Trapped inside a sweltering car with a child who couldn't breathe, a mother on the edge, and a Saint Bernard with blood in its teeth, Cujo didn't need a ghost to terrify you. It just needed the heat, the silence, and the sound of growling getting closer. Adapted from one of Stephen King's most psychologically brutal novels, Cujo wasn't about a rabid dog. It was about the disintegration of the American family, of protection turning to threat, and of maternal instinct clashing with rising panic. Yet behind this film's grime and desperation lies a strange underworld of hidden truths, of mechanical dogs that refused to work, of actors who broke down on set for real, and of an alternate ending so bleak, even King himself said it was too much. You've seen the slobber, you've heard the bark, but you haven't heard the whole story. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Cujo. 1983. Fact 1. The dog that wasn't always a dog. When Cujo lunges at the car, fur-matted and eyes blazing, you assume you're watching a real Saint Bernard. But in many shots, what you're seeing is a man in a dog suit. To create Cujo's increasingly aggressive behavior without endangering cast or animals, director Louis Teague employed a mix of trained dogs, animatronic puppets, and yes, actor Gary Morgan crawling on all fours in a custom-made dog costume. The effect was convincing enough to fool even some of the crew watching on monitors. The filmmakers cycled through 5 different Saint Bernards, all trained for specific tasks, one for barking, another for jumping, another just to stand still and look terrifying. But the dogs were too friendly, tails wagged in takes, meant to be terrifying. To hide that, the team glued their tails down, literally. And when even that failed, the crew had no choice but to bring in the man dog for the most physically complex sequences. You might laugh now, but in motion, under sweat and shadow, those shots were anything but funny. How many scenes have you seen without realizing it wasn't a dog at all? Fact 2. Dee Wallace wasn't acting, she was breaking. In the climactic scene where Donna Trenton finally snaps and attacks Cujo with nothing but raw desperation, Dee Wallace's screams seemed too real. That's because they were. Wallace was pushed to the brink during production, filming in oppressive heat inside an actual Ford Pinto that reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. She had to perform multiple takes with sweat blinding her, fake blood on her skin, and a prosthetic dog head lunging toward her face. She begged for shorter days, but the schedule was brutal. Wallace later confessed in interviews that she doesn't remember filming parts of the ending not out of secrecy, but because her brain blocked it out. It wasn't just a performance, it was a trauma response. After one particular take, she collapsed outside the car, hyperventilating. The crew stopped rolling, but the director told her it was gold. To this day, Wallace calls Cujo the most emotionally scarring film I've ever made. And yet, that raw breakdown is what makes her performance unforgettable. Fact 3. Stephen King doesn't remember writing it. Cujo might be one of Stephen King's most intense and grounded horror stories, but there's a twist. The author doesn't remember writing a single word of it. In his memoir on writing, King admitted that during the early 80 seconds, his cocaine and alcohol addiction was so severe that entire books were written in a blur. Cujo was one of them. "I like the story," he said. "I just wish I could remember enjoying the process." That revelation shocked fans, especially considering how well the novel taps into primal fear. The themes of helplessness, rage, and domestic collapse were deeply personal but subconsciously written. Some critics later argued that Cujo was King's mind subconsciously screaming for help. Ironically, Cujo is one of the few King novels without any supernatural element. No ghosts, no telekinesis, just a rabid dog. And maybe that's why it hits so hard. It's real. Can a masterpiece be created entirely from muscle, memory, and pain? Fact 4. The child actor was shielded from the truth. Danny Pintorro, who played little Tad Trenton, delivered a performance that broke audiences. The terror, the choking asthma attacks, the paralyzing fear, it all felt heartbreakingly real. But what's shocking is, he never saw the dog in full attack mode. The filmmakers, fully aware of Pintorro's young age and the psychological risks, made a calculated decision. They would film most of his scenes separately from the actual dog. Instead, they used props, puppets, and adult stand-ins to trigger his reactions. The few moments he interacted with Cujo directly were carefully choreographed and supervised. In fact, Pintorro reportedly thought he was making a movie about a sick dog, not a killer. It wasn't until years later, when he saw the final cut, that he realized the film's true horror. While many child actors from horror films speak of nightmares and trauma, Pintoro was spared that fate, at least during filming. But some viewers have asked, does his performance feel so real because he wasn't acting fear, but confusion? Fact 5. Cujo was based on a real encounter and a loaded gun. Stephen King's inspiration for Cujo wasn't imagined in a dream, it was snarling at him in real life. During a trip to a remote auto shop in rural Maine, King found himself face to face with an enormous Saint Bernard that lunged at him the moment he stepped out of his car. The dog's owner barely managed to hold it back. When King joked that the dog should be kept leashed, the owner calmly replied, "If it had been a week earlier, I'd have shot him. He just got back from the vet." King was rattled, but intrigued. Days later, Cujo was born. The dog in the novel wasn't evil, it was sick. But King wanted to explore a deeper horror, how a mundane event car trouble could spiral into a life-or-death nightmare, with no villain except bad luck. What makes Cujo terrifying isn't the bite, it's the realism. And it all started with a growl in the middle of nowhere. Fact 6. The original ending was too brutal to film. If you thought the ending of Cujo was intense, here's what you didn't see. The original conclusion was far, far darker. In Stephen King's novel, Tad, the little boy trapped inside the car, dies. Not from the dog, but from heat stroke and dehydration. Donna survives, but only to discover that her heroic efforts were too late. It's a gut punch of a finale, emphasizing real horror, that sometimes you can fight with everything you've got and still lose. When it came time to adapt the book into a movie, the studio hesitated. Test audiences were devastated. Early screenings reportedly ended in stunned silence. So the filmmakers rewrote the ending. Tad survives in the film, gasping back to life in his mother's arms. Some fans argue this was the right choice. Others say it betrayed the emotional core of the story. Even Stephen King later admitted, "That ending broke my heart, but it was the truth." Which would you rather have, hope or honesty? Fact 7. The crew had to battle the weather, then fake it. The sweltering heat in Cujo isn't just part of the story, it's a character in itself. But here's the irony. The film was shot during a surprisingly cold season. While the script called for a scorching, oppressive summer atmosphere to intensify the claustrophobia, the actual shooting schedule took place in Northern California during months when the temperature often dropped below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. To sell the illusion of unbearable heat, the crew sprayed the actors with glycerin and water to simulate sweat. The car interiors were heated with lamps, and actors wore minimal clothing while shivering between takes. The hardest part? Keeping the dogs looking like they were suffering from heat. Their fur was constantly misted, dirtied, and matted. But the dogs kept panting in the cold because that's what they're trained to do when told to act hot. The result is seamless on screen. You'd never guess the actors were cold. But now that you know, can you unsee the artificial sweat the next time you watch it? Fact 8. A forgotten scene nearly broke the film's tone. Buried deep in the original shooting script is a deleted scene so bizarre it could have shattered the psychological horror tone of Cujo. In the cut footage, there was a surreal, dreamlike sequence showing Donna hallucinating a giant version of Cujo outside the car, its head filling the windshield, its eyes glowing unnaturally red. The scene was intended to show Donna's descent into madness, but test audiences found it laughable. It looked more like a monster movie than the grounded, terrifying realism the rest of the film built. The special effects used to create the giant Cujo weren't finished, and even the director admitted it felt tonally out of sync. So the scene was scrapped entirely, but it cost days of shooting and thousands of dollars. Some rare stills exist from that deleted moment, and they look almost comically absurd. Would Cujo still haunt you if it had turned into a giant dog hallucination film halfway through? Fact 9. The dog trainer became a shadow director. While Louis Teague is credited as the film's director, there was another silent force shaping many of the most iconic moments: Carl Lewis Miller, the head dog trainer. Miller had trained animals for numerous films, but Cujo was different. The choreography required from the St. Bernards was dangerously specific. Sudden charges, muzzle hits, snarls on cue. These weren't just tricks, they were stunts. And often, it was Miller, not Teague, who dictated how a scene would be blocked and shot, based on what the dogs could realistically do. On set, Miller directed the dogs with hand signals, hidden treats, and vocal cues. When they needed a bark at a specific line of dialogue, it was Miller's timing that made it work. He even advised on camera angles to hide the limitations of the animal actors. Some crew members joked that Miller was Cujo's real director. It raises an interesting question. Who gets the credit, the one behind the camera or the one behind the beast? Fact 10. the film nearly had a very different director and dog. Before Louis Teague took the reins, Cujo was almost directed by Peter Medak, the filmmaker behind The Changeling, 1980, a film known for its chilling atmosphere and psychological dread. Under Medak's vision, Cujo would have been even more art house and symbolic, focusing less on the visceral horror and more on Donna's psychological collapse. But after weeks of pre-production, Medak clashed with producers over creative control and was replaced. Along with him, the original idea of casting a Doberman instead of a Saint Bernard was thrown out. Yes, Cujo was nearly a Doberman. Lean, menacing, and classically associated with guard dog aggression, it would have given the film a very different energy, more sleek terror than tragic monstrosity. Producers eventually decided that using a Saint Bernard, a breed normally associated with rescue, gentleness, and family, would deliver more emotional impact. After all, what's scarier than the idea that your protector could become your predator? Would Cujo have been as disturbing if it looked like the villain from the start? Fact 11. One scene was so intense it made the cameraman cry. During the pivotal sequence where Donna believes her son has stopped breathing, everything in the frame collapses. The lighting tightens, the sound design drops out, and Dee Wallace's performance becomes borderline primal. Behind the camera, veteran cinematographer Jan de Bont, who would later direct Speed, was operating the lens. And according to crew reports, he silently wept after the first take. The intensity of Wallace's emotion, combined with the confined space and the raw realism of the moment, made the line between fiction and reality blur. De Bont later said it reminded him of a car accident he'd witnessed years earlier, where a mother had desperately tried to revive her child. It was too real, he said, too close. Not many horror films produce that kind of reaction, not fear, but grief. And that may be what sets Cujo apart. It doesn't scare you, it suffocates you. Fact 12. The dog had a personal air-conditioned trailer. While the human cast suffered under heat lamps and sweat spray, Cujo, the real star, was treated like royalty. The production rented a custom air-conditioned trailer specifically for the dogs. Inside, the Saint Bernards could rest, hydrate, and cool down between takes. Their fur was combed regularly, paws checked for overheating, and water bowls were refilled obsessively. Meanwhile, Dee Wallace was stuck inside a stifling car for hours on end, sometimes passed out from heat exhaustion. When asked about the unequal conditions, Wallace reportedly joked the dog had better treatment. But then again, he didn't have to cry on cue. In the hierarchy of the Cujo set, it was clear. The dog was king, and honestly, with that level of screen presence, maybe he deserved it. Fact 13. The blood wasn't just fake, it was fermented. Cujo's dripping, frothing mouth is one of the film's most iconic visuals. But how they achieved that grotesque look might turn your stomach. The crew used a combination of egg whites, sugar, syrup, and animal liver puree to simulate saliva mixed with blood. Left under hot lights, the concoction would ferment quickly, creating a smell so rancid that actors flinched not from fear, but from nausea. Dee Wallace later recalled that certain scenes with the animatronic dog were almost unbearable because of the stench. The dog puppets would ooze the fake saliva non-stop, and because of how sticky it was, crew members had to use garden hoses to clean up between takes. Ironically, the smell made the real dogs uncomfortable too. One Saint Bernard reportedly refused to act scary when the smell became too intense. You may remember the foam, you may remember the teeth, but now you know what you were really seeing was heat-rotted goo. Fact 14. Donna's breakdown was rewritten on the spot. One of the most raw and emotionally explosive scenes, Donna finally snapping and charging at Cujo with a baseball bat, wasn't in the original script. At least, not like that. Originally, the scene was meant to be slow, almost ritualistic. A mother dragging herself from the car, beaten and hopeless, barely able to lift her weapon. But when the cameras rolled, Dee Wallace didn't follow the plan. In a moment of pure instinct, she let out a primal scream, sprinted, and began smashing the prop dog head with everything she had. The bat broke. The camera kept rolling. No one called cut. The director decided to scrap the planned scene entirely and keep Wallace's version. It wasn't just more intense, it was real. Fueled by days of exhaustion and suppressed emotion, it became the catharsis the film needed. Sometimes the best scenes aren't written, they're survived. Fact 15. A second dog almost ruined everything. While the Saint Bernards on set were extensively trained, they weren't the only animals involved. For certain shots, the team used a Labrador Retriever disguised as a Saint Bernard because it was smaller, more agile, and easier to control. But there was one problem. Labradors wag their tails when excited, During intense scenes, the disguised dog kept wagging its tail furiously, completely breaking the illusion of menace. Frustrated, the trainers and crew resorted to a crude solution. They glued the dog's tail down using a non-toxic adhesive. It worked for a while until the dog sat down and the glue pulled at the fur. The scene was ruined. The dog yelped. Shooting was halted for hours. They eventually abandoned the tail fix idea and edited around the wagging in post. The next time you rewatch Cujo, look closely at the dog's tail. If it's stiff, you're probably watching a lie held together with glue. Fact 16. Cujo was a metaphor for something much darker. Most audiences watched Cujo as a story about a dog gone mad. But Stephen King had something far more disturbing in mind. The novel was written at the height of King's addiction, a time when he was struggling with rage, paranoia, and a complete loss of control over his life. In retrospect, King admitted that Cujo was an unintentional metaphor for himself, a trusted force turned violent, destroying everything around it. Donna's descent into desperation mirrored what King saw in his wife. The isolation, the helplessness, the horror of watching a loved one spiral, it was all there, but filtered through the lens of genre. In this reading, Cujo isn't just a rabid dog. He's addiction. He's the monster within the familiar. And the car? It's the cage that love becomes when you can't escape the person you once trusted. So, was Cujo really about a dog? Or was it King's darkest confession? Fact 17. The budget was so tight, they had to reuse blood. Cujo looks gritty, brutal, and soaked in chaos. But behind the scenes, the filmmakers were constantly battling an invisible monster, money. The production budget was tight, just over $8 million. Most of that went to special effects, animal training, and location control, which meant corners had to be cut elsewhere. One of the strangest compromises? Reusing fake blood. Instead of mixing new batches for every take, the effects team would scoop up puddles of blood from previous shots, filter out dirt and debris, and reapply it. Sometimes they'd just add water to thin it out. Other times, they'd pour it through cheesecloth to clean out bugs. The result was inconsistent. Some takes have bright red gore, others look brownish and thin, but it worked, and most viewers never noticed. It raises an odd point, though. How much of Cujo's realism comes from desperation, not design? Fact 18. The ending was changed without Stephen King's permission. Stephen King is famously flexible with filmmakers adapting his work, but even he was surprised by the final cut of Cujo. In the book, Tad dies. In the movie, he survives. That decision wasn't run by King before release. He reportedly only found out about the change after watching a rough-cut screening, where he sat silently through the ending, then said nothing for several minutes. Later, he told an interviewer, "It works for the movie, but it's not my story anymore." King understood the change. It made the film more palatable for general audiences. But the emotional weight of Donna's trauma? It shifted. With Tad alive, the film ends in relief. With Tad gone, it ends in devastation. So the question becomes, do we need tragedy to make horror real? Or is survival enough? Fact 19. The car was more dangerous than the dog. Throughout Cujo, the Ford Pinto becomes a tomb sealed, sweltering, and slowly suffocating its occupants. But in real life, the danger wasn't just cinematic metaphor. The Pinto had a reputation. In the late 1970 seconds and early 80 seconds, the Ford Pinto had become infamous for exploding when rear-ended due to a poorly designed gas tank. Lawsuits had been filed, fatalities documented, and yet, that was the car chosen as the central trap of the film. Was it deliberate? According to production notes, it was. The filmmakers wanted a small, boxy car with claustrophobic interiors, and the Pinto fit the bill. But the symbolic irony wasn't lost on anyone. A car known for blowing up now slowly cooked a child to the edge of death. No fire needed. It's easy to focus on the dog. But what if the real villain of Cujo was corporate negligence, sealed in steel? Fact 20. Cujo's legacy was buried then resurrected. For years, Cujo was dismissed by critics. Too bleak, too simple, too dog-centric. It was considered one of the lesser King adaptations, overshadowed by The Shining, Carrie, Misery. But over time, something shifted. Scholars began to reevaluate the film's tight psychological construction. Feminist critics explored Donna's arc as a rare depiction of maternal rage and empowerment. Horror fans praised the unrelenting dread, the grounded realism, and the absence of supernatural crutches. Even Stephen King, long ambivalent about the film, eventually admitted, "It's one of the most honest movies made from my work." Now Cujo is studied in film schools, quoted in horror retrospectives, and referenced in pop culture as shorthand for loyalty, turned lethal. It didn't explode at the box office, it didn't win awards, but it endured. And sometimes, survival is the scariest story of all. Bonus fact: the real Cujo was adopted and forgotten. When filming Wrapped, the star of Cujo, or rather, one of the 5 Saint Bernards used, was offered up for adoption. His name was Mo. Trained, gentle, and obedient, he had terrified millions on screen. But in real life, he loved belly rubs and peanut butter. A crew member took Mo home. For years, he lived as a regular family dog in Northern California. Children played with him in the yard, completely unaware they were cuddling with a horror icon. His new owners didn't advertise his past. No fanfare, no appearances, just a quiet retirement in the suburb. Mo died peacefully of old age. No plaques, no gravestone, just a footnote in production records. And yet, he lives forever on screen as a symbol of fear, violence, and primal survival. There's something haunting about that. The monster we feared spent his last days chasing tennis balls. Which fact hit you the hardest? The forgotten ending? The glue on the dog's tail? Or the idea that Stephen King doesn't remember writing any of it? Tell us in the comments which moment from Cujo still lingers in your mind, and what film you want us to dig into next. Don't forget to subscribe for more strange truths hidden in plain sight.